Who do you think owns water?
Oh, good question. Um, I don't know. I don't know. I have never really thought of that. The individual towns where the body of water is located, maybe?
Who do you think owns water?
Sorry?
No one?
Who owns water?
Nobody.
Everyone?
God?
Ooh. Let's get that straight. Well, there are water right laws throughout the country that are different for each state. I know that.
Colorado, for example, very different from Massachusetts.
Yep.
Um, Depends on, I think, the jurisdiction and kind of the rights, the water rights associated with them. And I mean, the oceans, I don't think anyone does.
That's a good one. I would who owns water? I would say nobody. Who owns everybody?
The Earth, the planet.
Ooh, good question. I don't know. Can you own water? Is that possible? I know people have bought up aquifers and stuff like that. I know the Ipswich River is a pretty big supplier of community water here, and I work for the brewery, and we use a ton of water. So, we don't claim ownership over it though. So, I'm not really sure about that.
Nobody owns water.
Yeah, that's the way it should be.
Yes, the age-old question, who owns water? Most people don't ever put much thought into who owns the very water streaming out of their tap. Use the water, pay the bill, that's that. But for others, steady access to local water in great volume is essential to uphold their businesses. Water supply departments work to treat and provide municipal water to many households, and others still give priority to the health of the natural world and its sustained ability to supply a community of people and wildlife. But no matter who is using the water, how it is being used, and how exactly it is being harvested, all of the water in the geographic region of the Ipswich River Watershed can be traced back to the Ipswich River. The Ipswich River is located in North Shore, Massachusetts. It begins in Burlington and Wilmington, passing through the towns of Reading, North Reading, Peabody, Middleton, Topsfield, Boxford, and Hamilton, before connecting with the sea in Ipswich. Even more towns have land within the Ipswich River Watershed, which is the geographic region that channels all within bounds rainfall into the river. The Ipswich River is a water source for many towns in the watershed as well as some towns outside of its watershed.
My name's Erin Bonnie Casey, and I'm the Planning and Resiliency Program Manager here at the Ipswich River Watershed Association.
This is our groundwater model, and what we can see here is basically how all of the water in the watershed is connected. So if we think of this as representing the rain, if we make it start raining in the watershed, the water will start to recharge into the ground. So as the water flows through all of these layers, it starts to fill up from the bottom, and then it starts to make its way downstream. So you can see as it's raining, our lake is filling up, and the water is moving this way, and it's also filling up our rivers. What happens when people drill wells, depending on the depth of your well, you're pulling from different parts of the aquifer. But the thing is, it's all the same water. And so as people pull water out of their wells, what it actually does is drop the level of the groundwater, and that in turn affects the level of our lakes and our rivers.
There's a couple of different ways to approach the question of who has a right to water. I mean, from a legal perspective, Massachusetts does issue water use permits, but because many of our towns and cities are so old, their water use exists before the regulations, so they legally have the right to use water. For towns and cities and water users that have been permitted since roughly the 1980s, they get a permit from the state to use a certain amount of water, and they have the right to use that amount of water. I would also argue that the environment has a right to water. There's a ton of benefits that we get from having a healthy river and watershed from stormwater management to, you know, the wildlife that it supports. In the North Shore, the clam fisheries are really important, which relies on a healthy ecology and watershed. But those uses, or those water users, don't really have a legal standing. And that's the challenge, is that when water supplies come under pressure and you have a drought, the environment is kind of last in line to get the water supplies and ends up suffering the most negative impacts. There's a couple of things we're concerned about in the Ipswich watershed in particular. One is that about 80% of our water use is outside of the bounds of the watershed. And what that means is the cities primarily to the south of us, Salem, Beverly, Peabody, they use Ipswich River water, but they are not geographically located in the watershed, which means that all of the water they pull out of the watershed, when it goes to those towns, it never comes back in. Any water that goes down your drain in Salem ultimately ends up going to a treatment plant and then out into Salem Sound. And so all that 80% of water use is being taken from the watershed and never returns. The other thing that we are concerned about for people within the watershed is that when you use water, especially for outdoor lawn watering or other outdoor uses, there's a lot of evaporative loss, which means the water, all of the water that you put on your lawn doesn't end up soaking through and going into groundwater. A lot of it ends up evaporating straight into the air. And that water obviously is not returned to the watershed either. And so that's the reason that it's not just a closed loop within the North Shore.
So, who actually owns water? If we're all drawing from the same limited source, how do we determine how much we're allotted? Who is in charge? I visited the Salem Beverly water suppliers to get their perspective on this question.
My name is Brad Horn. I'm the Deputy Director for the Salem Beverly Water Supply Board. We represent both the interests of the cities of Salem, Beverly, and also parts of Wenham. We provide water for the communities through various ways. I don't like putting over reservoir and locking in reservoir. Some of it's from the natural drainage of those reservoirs, and then also we bring in water from the Ipswich River when it's in the flood stages between December 1st and May 31st, if the water is there and available.
Right, so the water from the Ipswich River, we own it when we're allowed to take it.
Oh, we have rights.
Nobody really owns it, but we have rights to take some of it from there.
Once we take it once we take it and bring it into our reservoirs, and then we have control of it. But prior to that point, it's open to anybody up to that.
We essentially own the responsibility to treat it, basically, and then distribute it to the two communities. So I guess in some fashion, the communities own the water. We're the keepers of the water and we're the treaters of the water.
So everyone using water from this watershed is drawing water directly from this very river that I'm kayaking in. This water right here, whether in related tributaries, ponds, or in the ground, is what Boxford, Wilmington, Ipswich, Lynnfield, Middleton, Danvers, Topsfield, Beverly, Salem, Lynn, Peabody, Hamilton, and Wenham all rely on. However, it is not just for typical household use. All the businesses in these towns that use water for production and manufacturing of their products, irrigation, and other industrial uses are all also drawing water right from this watershed.
Yeah, I'm Gary Rogers. I'm the founder and the chief of business operations for True North Ale Company. So when we're brewing beer, obviously the majority of the ingredients of beer is water. The use of the water in making that beer is more than that. There is water that's left behind in the spent grain. There's steam that goes off during the boiling process. So we're losing some of the water that we start with. So we're starting with more than 1,000 gallons in order to get 1,000 gallons. When we clean up after making beer, whether it's the brewing process or in the fermentation tanks, there's a significant amount of water that is used there. So we use a tremendous amount of water. We get all of our water directly from the Ipswich Public Water Supply, which comes from the Ipswich River. As a massive user of water, we have significant conservation efforts in place. Just for the cleanup, we try to do what's called side streaming of the water to preserve that. Yeah, we rinse glasses when we pour a beer, and it just makes for a nicer pour. Well, that's a nice to have, so we stopped rinsing the glasses. Probably the most important thing that we have done is raise awareness of the use of water, especially from the Ipswich River, with a project that we did last year with 11 breweries that use the Ipswich River water, and that was the Endangered Ale project. We brewed a specialty beer called Endangered Ale, where the Ipswich River was one of the most endangered, top 10 endangered rivers in the country, designated for 2021. Well, God owns water, right? It's Mother Nature. The thing is that what we need to do is make sure that the things that we're doing as a business and the commercial use of the water just all makes good sense. All that water recycles around, it goes through that process of we make it into beer, people take it into what comes out of the other end and goes but that liquid keeps going around, and I think that the ownership of that is flighting. We say that we have it because we capture it and put it into a beer can or a keg, but it's not really. It's going to return to nature, and hopefully it will be cleansed and we'll be using it again. So that's as things cycle around. But ownership is it's the earth. That's what it's all about.
My name is Andrew Mulholland. I am the son of Peter and Elizabeth Mulholland, who are the owners of Valley View Farm that you can see behind us. We're a goat farm in Topswood, Massachusetts. We have about 40 goats that we milk and produce anywhere between 5,000 to about 9,000 pounds of goat cheese every year.
Businesses are so important to the community. At the state level, business water use is considered essential. Could you explain some of the ways you believe farms are important to our community?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the easy first answer to that is that they make us food, and so we gotta have them around if we want to keep eating. The animals gotta drink water. The crops need water in order to grow, but there's also all the side pieces of that. We have to keep our equipment clean, and that involves using water, and that water is no longer potable afterwards. It has to be put into a septic system, and so I think it's easy to say that farms are essential, just by virtue of producing food, but because food is such a central part of our existence, it's the most essential thing I think that we have as a civilization. So we do our best in every way that we use water to minimize it. In the places that we kind of can't get away with water, not using water, i.e. feeding the goats or giving the goats water, we do things like not having freestanding water, but instead using little spigots that they can pull the water that they want from, so we're not wasting water by just having gross water around. When we're cleaning, we're minimizing the water we're using to do that while obviously remaining safe. Instead of cooling our milk with new water every time, we recirculate the water and use an ice bank chiller to cool the milk down and do our pasteurization. So we on the property have multiple wells that we draw water from. What's nice about having the well septic system pairing is that we can use the water, and then as long as it's staying on the property by virtue of going into our septic system, we're recharging the groundwater that we can draw from again, and so hopefully overall using less water by virtue of just circulating the water that we're using in general. We need to be really careful about the resources that we're using, and water is easily one of the most important ones. So we own the water that we are using, and we have the responsibility to keep others using it efficiently as well.
Next, I headed over to New England Biolabs to determine the perspective of an innovative bioscience company on the question of water ownership.
I'm Pat Norton. I'm part of the Facilities and Engineering Group at New England Biolabs. And NEB are a leader in the discovery, development, and production of enzymes and technologies for molecular biology applications. We'll use water for a lot of the same purpose you will at home, for bathrooms, drinking water, especially with the production of coffee, which seems to drive research here. Our cafeteria uses water for the preparation of food and provides meals for all of our employees. Our building conditioning systems, we use water. The research and development groups, we use water in small quantities for their experiments. And in production, they'll use water for manufacturing and formulation of our products, also in the cleaning of the equipment used in that process. We're inside the greenhouse, which is a solar aquatic system. So it treats our waste streams to better than drinking quality water before getting recharged back into the groundwater supply. It's a huge benefit over the traditional town sewer systems, which use chemicals to treat water, and that gets sent out into the ocean. So our waste streams enter into the facility and then into the series of solar aquatic tanks behind me. It's sent to the clarifier and then filtered through this marsh, ultimately getting treated by UV before being sent out to the leaching field and again recharging the groundwater supply. So we're inside a living system. It takes a lot of energy and resource to maintain, but it's something that we're also very proud of. As you look around the campus, you'll notice we've taken care to minimize impervious surface, installing water infiltration systems and rain gardens, and looking at effective ways to harvest rainwater and recharge that back into the ground. I think there's also an interesting question in there about who deserves water, and are water conservation efforts really going to be enough, or do we need to look at it in a broader sense in climate change? And I've been lucky enough to work at life science companies like New England Biolabs, who are dedicating resources and investments towards reducing our carbon footprint and providing examples for other companies and communities on how that can be done.
This river is being pulled in so many different directions by so many who use water for all sorts of purposes, from breweries to biotech labs to farms to everyday use in homes. Its use is being managed by Mass DEP, town legislation, water suppliers, environmental nonprofits, and even by everyday decisions of regular people. There are so many perspectives to consider, and there is no one right answer. But this is an important conversation that needs to be had.